there will be some evolution as the 20-somethings get older and choose to go through the life stages, but they're going through the life stages very differently. And so we also have to kind of accept that that's what's happening as well, that there is not as much pressure to get married younger, and there's not as much pressure to have children even at all in many cases.
To make a move like that, you have to have kahunas and conviction.
Long term, I'm bullish. We could see about a 20% correction next year.
This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. Hi, everybody. This is Josh Jelinski. We're live taking your questions on all matters financial. We're on live streaming right now on Clubhouse for best-selling author of Launching Financial Grownups. And Bobbi, what is the proper pronunciation of your last name?
Thank you for asking, Josh. It's Bobbi Rebell. Thank you so much.
So I did it right. Okay, I was like, oh,
you did it right.
Did I make it sound sophisticated and it really was something else? So Bobbi Rebell,
it's perfect.
You've had many good books out. We had you for your last one. So tell us about what prompted you to write this new book. You're a best-selling author, big financial guru, CFP, financial journalist extraordinaire. Why write another book? Why write a new one?
Well, first of all, I guess I had to make my title longer, Josh, because that was ridiculous. Thank you so much for that kind intro. You're a parent. This is inspired by my kids. So I have 3 kids. The first 2 are the bonus babies, as they like to say, that are now 25 and 22. But when they were in college, I had a hard time sort of managing how I was going to talk to them about money, even though I did it for a living. And so I was talking to strangers about money and I could tell people what to do, but actually getting teenagers and young 20-somethings to do what you know they should do. Like in this case, it was the Roth IRA. They were both earning money at their jobs, doing great. These were good kids. And yet I couldn't get them to simply open up a Roth IRA, put the money in there and invest it. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And am I the only one that is having trouble with their young adult children? And I discovered I was not the only one, but I did have access to some incredible experts. So I was able to interview not just money experts, Josh, but also financial therapists and parenting experts and just everyday parents that were struggling with similar issues, just like me, where they had kids that were great, but simply didn't have the real life money skills that they needed at the time they needed it, which is very different from teaching younger children.
So let's talk about the Roth. I was just talking to somebody today, 30-year-old woman, getting started, single woman, saving 10% of her salary into her 401k. She wasn't doing a Roth. I was just shocked. Like, haven't you heard about this? Let's talk about that real quick.
Everyone should do them.
This young woman had it together. I mean, she didn't make a ton of money. She had disability insurance, had short-term disability, had an emergency fund of 12 months living expenses, was putting 10% a year in her 401k, was doing everything right, but she didn't do a Roth. She even had a budget. She lived below her means, didn't make a ton of money, but really was off to a great start. I always love to help people who listen, or relatives of clients or daughters or nieces or nephews. And I was shocked too, like nobody ever told you about a Roth. I guess that's one thing that we in the financial industry know about that most people don't know about. So let's just talk there. Let's just start there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I like the fact that you, in your question, were talking about the fact that this book is really not just for parents of young adults and I call them almost adults, but it's also for everyone that has one in their life that they care about. It might be your niece, your nephew, it might be your grandchild, it might be just a younger friend that is, just chronologically in age younger than you and may not have the everyday money and life skills that you have. So this is a great book for everyone in that sense. For the Roth IRA, what a wonderful vehicle, because if you're young and you are in a low tax bracket and you qualify because of your income, you can put money in, pay tax up front, and then you're done, which is a wonderful thing. The 401k, though, I will say, if you get a company match, might be the first thing if you have to do an either or. But the Roth IRA is great, and I know there's some changes. I don't want to speak wrong. You probably know better than I do. There's been talk about changes in the idea of the backdoor Roth IRA. So that's interesting, but that's something else for other people to be focused on now, that if you think you may lose that benefit, to maybe think about a backdoor Roth IRA as well. And you can speak to that. I'm sure your audience is well educated on where that legislation is, or it's not yet. But
yeah, we don't have a backdoor Roth ban yet. That was a big deal. The Build Back Better plan was going to kill the backdoor Roth. The backdoor Roth is for those of you who make too much money to do a traditional Roth. You can put money in a non-deductible IRA and then convert it. You got to watch the pro rata rule, but it is something that is still hot for 2022. It's still live. And we're with best-selling author Bobbi Rebell live on Clubhouse taking your questions, and on WOR every Saturday and Sunday at 9, New York's biggest AM talk station. We're also on Spotify now, YouTube. And now we have best-selling author, really one of my favorite female journalists in the financial space. What would you call yourself? A financial journalist, financial author, CFP? I know you're all of those things, but what do you say you are when people say, what do you do for a living?
I think it depends who the person is. That's actually a really good question for how you teach your children how to present themselves when they sort of emerge in their career, because they have to learn how to introduce themselves to different adults and different people in the business world, especially now as we're moving out of the pandemic and people are starting to go back in person. You have to teach your children that. I always struggle. So what I say is it depends on the context of where you are and the kind of person that you're interacting with. So right now, because my book just came out and I'm talking about my book, I'm going to go with author. But if I was speaking to you at a different time, I might say podcast host, because I have a podcast called Money Tips for Financial Grownups. So it depends on the context, but I'll take them all, Josh. It's all good.
No, fantastic. And we have a lot to talk about. So folks on Clubhouse, if you have a financial question, maybe you're trying to develop your kids. I mean, that's something. I have 7 kids. I'm obsessed about how my kids will turn out.
I'm like, they're going to be amazing, Josh. They're amazing.
They are going to be amazing. It's funny. We were in Hawaii on a vacation, and this guy who's like a famous podcaster came up and he was like, oh, your kids are really good and well behaved, and we hit it off. And I'm going to be on his podcast next week, so you never know, small world. But I'm obsessed about developing talent, particularly in my kids. And we talk about everything. I have a 13-year-old girl who knows formal logic, like she's just a brainiac. She's smarter than I am. An 11-year-old girl knows Latin, 10-year-old boy, and then a whole slew of 4 other kids after that. And I'm obsessed about how to get them to be financially wise. Like, what do I do now? And I'm sure we have a lot of people who they've come into money or they've built a legacy as an entrepreneur. Like, my kids are into, like, pursuits. You know, my daughters are right now into, like, Anne of Green Gables. And they want to go to Prince Edward Island. And they're dressing up like old Victorian actresses. They have nothing... They have really no desire to deal with money. I have no clue how to develop them financially. I have my ideas and things I'm testing. I basically tell them no to everything and have them be creative, but then they use my wife against me, and she gives in to them. But I do think, this is going to be hard, but I have essentially trained them from birth that I will never pay for their college. I don't know if I'll really pay for their college or not, but I want them to feel that weight. Does that make sense? Like that they're going to have to prepare. It makes total sense, yeah. Because in reality, most of our kids are spoiled, if we're honest. You know, my kids are well positioned than I was financially. And like they don't really... It's very different than I was growing up. I mean, I had nothing. My kids are very blessed, you know, relatively. So what do you do? What do I do with my kids? Give me some parenting tips on how to develop my young children financially. Then we'll go to how to help adult kids, young adult kids, different phases and ages, all covered in your book, Launching Financial Grownups. And folks, if you want a copy of Launching Financial Grownups, Give me a call right now, 888-988-JOSH. We do have operators standing by. I will throw in a free copy if you schedule and keep a 45-minute wealth blueprint review. Bobbi is a great author, financial journalist, and podcaster, and I love hearing you talk. So go ahead. What do I do with my kids? Give me some parenting advice.
Well, first of all, I think you're stressing too much at such a young age. So the book is generally aimed. There's some books out there for kids that are younger that are great, including, by the way, the opposite of spoiled. You talk about kids being spoiled. Ron Lieber, New York Times Money columnist, who, by the way, is in my book as one of my featured experts. He wrote a great book called The Opposite of Spoiled. So if you have younger kids, go get Ron's book, The Opposite of Spoiled. My book kind of picks up there, 16 to 26. And the reason is that those are the ages when, Josh, it becomes real, where they're 16, like you talk about college. They're actually going to start looking, what is college tuition? Wait, how am I going to do this? Maybe I want a part-time job as a teenager so that I'm not taking out so many loans, right? So it becomes real maybe when you get a car around 16 or 17 years old. And that's when I kind of come in with the specific and practical skills. And a lot of it, by the way, has to do with starting with listening to them and really understanding that the way you approach them, the tone you use when you approach them, and the fact that you need to really avoid being judgmental is going to be essential in making sure that your message gets through. I mean, I don't know how you feel these days about crypto and NFTs and this and that, but it's important if your kid, for example, comes to you and starts saying, well, that's how I want to invest, listen to them and hear them out. And don't be judgmental. And then you can do, depending on what's right for you. But for me, what I would do is I would say, well, let's talk about diversification. Let's talk about risk tolerance. This is very risky. So maybe you want to make sure you're diversified, and maybe it's going to be a small percentage of your portfolio. But okay, you're young. If that's what you want to do with the money that you're earning in your part-time job, let's see what happens. And don't judge them. Let them find their way and give them the space, Josh, to grow up.
No, that's a good point. A good point. So you telling me you'll let your kids, Bitcoin's different. That makes sense to me. Some of these other things, they have an affectionate term online of that we all know that we probably can't say because of radio show. So I don't know. Maybe I'll be judgmental.
But Josh,
we'll
is it terrible to let your knife burned a little bit? If that happens,
I guess
is that really the worst
not.
thing?
My kids.
Right? Maybe you let them get burned because they understand what it is. Maybe you let them buy a meme stock that they heard about on Reddit,
there
right?
You go. So
let them
good.
Experience how that feels when it doesn't matter so much.
Let them scrape their knee. That's a great. That actually might be a good lesson right there. That's a really good lesson. So basically, 16 and under, let them be kids in your book. Maybe catch the wrong.
Well, let them learn the money lessons. Yeah, let them be the age appropriate, right? My book just doesn't focus on that age. I'm not saying that there aren't money lessons. I'm saying my book starts really at 16 when they're earning money and they have a car and all that. So I don't want to say that there aren't money lessons to be had before that age.
I think they're more lessons by watching your parents and like doing what they do or the opposite. I agree that the kids are more reachable at that young adult phase because they have some measure of freedom and they don't know how to handle it. So 16 to 19, let them scrape their knee. If they want to buy some stupid thing, let them do it. What other lessons?
Really important to listen to them and let them be their own person. I know that it's sometimes hard for parents because you have ideas about what you want your kids to aspire to be. And it's also hard because you also want them to follow their passion. But it's important to listen to them and then instead of telling them what to do, absorb what they're saying and then help them figure out how that's going to translate into what their life will be. So, for example, my stepdaughter, who's now 25, she got accepted to teaching school. She was going to be a teacher, but she also wanted a certain lifestyle in New York City. She wanted to own an apartment. She wanted, for example, now she's getting a puppy. She wanted to have disposable income and not feel constrained and also have more upside potential because teachers actually in New York do okay initially, but there's limited upside when you're a teacher. So we talked through and kind of thought about it with her and said, well, you like to teach. That could be a hobby on the side. You could be with kids on the side. She used to do a lot of swimming lessons and camp, and she's just good with kids. But for your income, maybe think about other things that you're good at. And she's very good at computers, and she's a good hacker, frankly. So she now is basically a cybersecurity consultant for a large firm, and she does very well financially. She now owns her own apartment at 25. She bought it at 24. And so, it's her decision, right? And it's important that it be her decision because let me tell you, one thing we learned during the pandemic when she was living at home, those kids work. Those entry-level kids in these consulting firms, yes, they're earning good money, but they're working for it. And so if you push a kid to do that and that's not what they want to do, then that's not going to be good. They're going to resent you and they're probably not going to be successful in that job. So you have to listen and sort of almost be a counselor, like take a step back and detach emotionally and think about how can they get to, whatever their most important goal is in terms of being a young adult and where they want to go with their career.
It seems like kids these days take longer to become independent adults compared to a generation ago. What kind of cultural changes have been going on?
This is the perfect question. And I spend a lot of time at the front of my book, Launching Financial Grownups, talking about the way that our society has changed in terms of our expectations and in terms of actual things that have happened. So, for example, Josh, the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, has many good things. It has helped so many people. That said, what it is in practice, it has delayed adulthood for many people, financial adulthood, I should say, because young adults are financially tied to their parents much longer. I mean, when I talked about my stepdaughter, when she got that job, her employer said, and they had full benefits and everything, but they said, of course, we expect most of you will stay on your parents' insurance. It's probably much better than our insurance. Well, that's because the companies now can get away with not paying for insurance for kids that are under 26. I said kids, but for young adults, and that saves them money. So in practice, it kind of keeps them tied to us, not just with insurance, but other things as well. For example, we're sharing Netflix subscriptions, we're sharing phone, plans, and so on. So it really ties. And then also, while again, the ACA is very good that it allows freelancers and gig economy workers to have health insurance, it also, again, keeps them in many ways out of jobs where the employer feels they have to offer insurance because they feel that you can get it in the marketplace. So it has sort of a mixed thing, but it's definitely delayed adulthood. And I think in general, culturally, people just take longer to grow up. It used to be in our generation, you're probably younger than me, but if you moved home after college, it was very temporary and you were kind of considered a slacker. You were trying to get out. There was an expectation if you were home.
Yeah, my brother was like 25. Now my brother was 25. He lived at home, and we were like loser. Not really.
Yes, it was like a loser thing, and now it's like, oh, that's so smart. They're saving money. They're with their parents. It's been normalized, and that happened even more, Josh, with the pandemic because people came home. Not even because they were failing, they weren't losers. This is a pandemic. You were coming home to be with your parents. It made total sense. But in practice, suddenly all these kids are home.
That is, I think, one thing. Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit more prone to judgment than probably you are. You seem very, very nurturing and endearing to people. But I'd be like, what's wrong? But I will tell you, I've learned this with being an employer, right? Like, people in their 20s, you kind of have this judgment, they're millennials or they're this or that. But usually if you get through that generational layer and they trust you, then it does end up being a better relationship. They're actually more old school than you think, more loyal, but they're motivated by different things than maybe our generation was, where, you go to work, you get a job, you make some money. They want to love where they work and feel nurtured and cared for. And
I think there will be some evolution as the 20-somethings get older and choose to go through the life stages, but they're going through the life stages very differently. And so we also have to kind of accept that that's what's happening as well, that there is not as much pressure to get married younger, and there's not as much pressure to have children even at all in many cases, and lots of new definitions of the kind of relationships that people are having. The other thing, Josh, that I think you sort of alluded to is that we as parents now, our kids are coming home, they have money, they're coming home to build up even more money because they don't necessarily want to sort of slum it the way we did. I mean, when I first moved out of my dad's house, I was in a tiny little studio facing the back of a building. My husband tells me, he had roommates in these, I don't know the details of it, but not nice apartments. Let's just say that. So you lived within your means, and so you lived pretty lean and pretty crummy when you were young. And to some degree, there's nothing wrong with that. But we as parents can't bear to have our children live like that. even though our parents allowed us to. I mean, my stepdaughter, who's 25, she bought an apartment. It's in a lovely doorman building. Now, she did live at home for 2 years. I talk about it in Launching Financial Grownups to save that money, but we were not going to allow her to live, basically the way that, my husband lived. My apartment was okay. It was safe, but where he lived, he wasn't going to let his kids live that way. No way. So that's also kind of on us. And there's some good and some bad.
So you mentioned in your book about how parents sometimes avoid talking to kids about money because they feel like they themselves have made financial mistakes. And in many cases are still not in great shape. What is your advice for them?
First one is don't be embarrassed, be transparent. Let your kids know because they may not understand that you have had your ups and downs. I mean, even writing this book, I discovered from my father, to whom I dedicated the book, that his financial life was not always perfect. Even though as a child, I never for a minute worried about our family's financial situation. Very few people have completely smooth roads. So it may help your child feel more secure and more confident that they're not, that they're doing fine. If you tell them, you have to be appropriate with what you're comfortable with. I'm not saying lay out all your cards. Kids may not know that you're vulnerable and they may ask for money and you may give them money that you shouldn't be giving them. And if they knew that it could jeopardize your financial security going forward in the retirement years, thus putting pressure, by the way, on them to help you later on, they might be a little bit more careful before they guilt you into giving them more financial support if they understand that, you may not have it, but your parents will give their kids their last dollar. That's the truth, Josh. A lot of parents will. Maybe not you, but a lot of parents, if their kid needs something, they're going to give it to them. And if the kids know how tight it is, they might be more proactive themselves to take care of themselves more fully. What's your answer?
I learned everything to do financially by seeing my parents struggle financially and then sort of doing the opposite. So they were really good people, but just down on their luck. Numerous health issues from 40 to 70 when my father passed, bankruptcy, disability. So I learned to not spend more than you make. Critical financial lesson, but they were kind of caught up in the 80s and 90s where you'd buy this and you'd buy that. And I always tell the one thing my mother left me, she didn't leave me much. She left me love, faith, a little bit of one of their houses that, it was like nothing. But she left me a Department 56. Do you know those? They're like these Christmas villages. And she had no money, but she thought this Department 56 thing was going to make it big. And it didn't. They're really kind of worth maybe $100 for these porcelain figurines. But to me, they're priceless. It's like a multi-million-dollar inheritance. And I tell my kids, okay, Grandma, she went bankrupt because she bought too much of these things. But you know what? This is my prized possession. Don't break it. And so that was the one thing I wanted when they passed, was their Christmas village. Half the things are broken, and they learn about how to keep their things a little bit because I think this generation, things are just disposable, so they don't learn that. So that's a good lesson. But I learned everything I knew about finance by doing the opposite of my parents, basically. So they were pretty transparent about their struggles, and it did help me man, don't do this, don't do that. They were generous and loving. I mean, they had no money, and they would give you $1 if they had none in their wallet. They were just that type of couple, and they were amazing. And I never felt like we didn't have anything, but we didn't, probably because of credit cards. But I learned a lot, and I think that's a great tip. So what are some strategies that parents can use to get their grown kids to listen to them? You mentioned not be judgmental. I found sometimes too, and I've had more success with clients' children than maybe the parent did. So sometimes a tip I would say is kind of use an expert or use maybe somebody who they might respect. So I think that's another tip. What other strategies would you suggest? Like if you want to get your kid to do a Roth,
first of all,
or insurance or something,
Yeah, well, two things. So first of all, I want to pick up on the excellent point that you made. I think it's really important, especially if you're worried that your kid is not that interested, you want to put up guardrails. And the best way to put up guardrails is, as you said, to get a third party involved, get a professional involved. Such a great idea. And one of the things that I'm doing with this book is I'm going out and I'm speaking to money managers, wealth management companies, family offices, and helping them, talk to their clients and do presentations to show their clients the importance of talking to their children, but also the value of bringing in third parties, because there's a different relationship. And we as parents have put down so many barriers because we, as I said earlier, we identify so much as our child's parents that sometimes we're not really objective. And sometimes even if we can use some of the tools that I talk about in the book, it is really valuable to have a third party. In fact, I will tell you, my father uses a money manager that his children, his adult children, we do meet with them, just to know what's going on with sort of the broader family picture. I also talk about a family ecosystem in the book where you all have to recognize that you're supporting each other. And even though in many cases the parents tend to have more money than the kids, things, evolve. And it's important that you sort of look at the total picture of what's going on in the whole family. And that's something that a wealth management company can really help with. It doesn't mean that all of your kids' money has to be there, but maybe some of it. And then some of it might be where they feel more comfortable, whether it's a robo-advisor or index fund, or maybe if they have enough money that it makes sense and they can diversify in individual stocks that they may choose. But it really makes a lot of sense to have a professional wealth manager in the mix.
What are some of the financial red flags for parents to know when they are doing too much to support their grown-up kids and potentially hurting their own financial goals? Or said another way, let's say you're paying for their Netflix or I'll ask that question. Then the follow-up is, what if you want your kid off your car phone, your cell phone, your Netflix, your this? How do you get them off? I would have my idea, which would be make them pay if they're trying to defray the costs and you're on Verizon or something and it's cheaper to have four of you, have them pay you or something. But I don't know. What have you found through that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that what you want to do is have them be aware of the cost that you're carrying. And so, for example, with a phone bill, very often if you take a kid off the phone bill, it's, let's say, their own phone bill will be at least $100, and having them on yours will be basically $25 for the same thing. So you go to this concept of the family ecosystem. I don't believe in increasing a cost just to teach a lesson. Find a different way to teach that lesson. So instead of say to them, listen, I'll let you stay on the family phone plan, but you're going to pay the amount between what we would pay without you on it and the amount that we pay with you on it, you're going to pay, right? So you're basically just separating it internally. And then you set up an automatic payment. So it's coming out of their bank account into your bank account every month on a regular basis, however you want to set it up, doesn't matter which app you use or whatever. And therefore, you don't have to be asking them, oh, you didn't give me the $35 yet this month, right? So it takes away the tension, it takes away the conflict, but they see that leaving their bank account every month. Case in point, I will tell you, my 25-year-old, she wanted to share our storage unit when she moved out. And we said, fine, we'll split the storage unit with you. And so she has been paying half. It's taken out of her account every month. And now next month, her boyfriend is moving in with her. So they want their own, I'm losing my voice. They want their own account. So she's going to have her own now. And so she specifically knows that we're taking money out of her bank account. And she told us proactively, I'm getting my own storage unit. And so I'm not paying for your unit anymore, my portion of your unit anymore. So please stop the auto pay. So she's aware of it every month, Josh. And I think that's a great lesson. And now that she's ready, she's naturally, she's 25, getting close to that 26, and she's moving into her own storage unit.
Yeah.
She
seems like a real killer.
She was a teenager. That's all I'll say. You're just getting into the teenage years, Josh. So,
folks, go over to Amazon by launching Financial Grownups. Actually, go over to BobbiRebell.com, BobbiRebell.com/launching Financial Grownups. This launching Financial Grownups topic is bigger than I think people realize. Virtually everyone of my wealthier clients deals with this, whether their kids are responsible or not. How do you make sure your kid is not a financial, profligate or, like the prodigal son or, or they're a leech on your family dime. All of these things are really great. What other things, and as we close out the interview, what other things haven't we talked about that you'd say, I really want to talk about this? I talk about this in the book.
Use this as an opportunity to bond more with your child rather than to separate. I think it's unrealistic to just say that we're going to cut our kids off arbitrarily at a certain life milestone or a certain age. That's a very antiquated idea. And it's important to hear them out and focus on helping them achieve their goals while understanding how that's going to play out. How will your life look if you choose this path? And also let them know that if they choose wrong, it's okay. They can course correct, and you're going to be there to help them do a reset or a pivot, whatever term you want to use. But keep that communication open. Make this an opportunity to be closer to your kids, even as you separate financially.
Now, as we conclude, final question. Parents sometimes look at their kids and wonder why they aren't adulting. I hate that word. But
I know.
But a lot of the time, parents need to look at their own behavior. You bring up this, and I guess that's a great point to end with. Be humble. Teach your kids humility. Share your stories. I so want my kids to be financially, knowledgeable. I mean, they're young. You're like, get a grip, Josh. But what do you do? Yeah, I guess final tip. What do you do?
Know your kid and know that each of your kids, especially you have 7 kids, you got 7 personalities. So work within that kid's interest, ability, and competence, and let them grow up to be the people that they're going to be. If they're not ready, accept that and put up guardrails. Like we talked about, having a wealth manager involved, having a third party involved to protect them until they're ready. But don't constantly subsidize them and, basically keep them as little kids. Let them know that you have adult expectations, that they be adults, and that you have the confidence that they will succeed, while also, keeping a safety net that they don't have to maybe know all the safety nets that's there, but make sure there are guardrails in place, especially if something, we never know. We talked about insurance. Things can happen to you. So put up those safety nets for the kids. Put up the guardrails. Always great to have a third party involved that's not a relative, a third party money manager or someone to, kind of have your back in case something happens, so that your money that the kids might inherit, for example, is going to be protected for their benefit when they are ready.
Head over to our website, Bobbi Rebell, BOBBIREBLL.com/launching financial grownups, or call my office, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674, 888-988-JOSH. Thank you so much for joining us, Bobbi.
Thank you so much for having me, as always.
Take care.